Hey there, comic book fans. Third week with no new comics. So I figured I'd show you a little bit of what I've been reading. Oh, and also, I did another 2-hour live video with Howler Mouse this past Saturday. So go over to his channel if you want to see Tim and I rambling on for 2 hours about comics. Last week, I showed you the Hypo. I read it. I enjoyed it. I think I gave it 3 out of 5 stars on Goodreads. And I also showed you Local, which I haven't cracked yet. I'm still planning on cracking it. It's out in my to be read section, but I haven't actually cracked it yet. Let me show you my, on top of my printer, which is flat, I put a couple of comics up there. And I always put one, usually I change it every week or so, of comics I bought just for their covers. And this is the one that's been on this week. Witchblade number 185. This is the only issue of Witchblade I ever bought. And I bought it not only because I liked the cover, but because this was the last issue of Witchblade. So I went a couple of years ago, whenever it came out, or at least Witchblade Volume 1. I think there was a Volume 2. So whenever it came out that week, I looked up at it and I kept and flashing back in my mind with everybody, showing off in their comic book hauls the last issue of this comic or the last issue of this comic, and they're always saying, the last issues are tough to get because by that time no one's buying the comic. So the last issues, you always hear about the last issues of G.I. Joe and the last issues of Transformers and stuff like that, because by that time no one was buying it, so they're hard to find. So I'm like, you know what, I'm gonna get the last issue of Witchblade. So I did, and it's in my bought just for their covers pile, and I've been sitting out in my top of my printer where I can go over and look at it. My museum section where I can live with a comic book cover I like every week. So what am I reading this one? I've actually not even planning on reading this. I've been reading this one. What is the name of this one? Masterful Marks. 16 graphic biographies. Cartoonists who changed the world. So this has got 16 cartoonists in them. And I've just been making my way through this one. It's all comic book 5-6 page comic book biographies of them. And what I've learned so far, man, you're much better off being a cartoonist if you're in magazines or comic strips than you are in comic books. Because the ones I've read so far, Siegel and Schuster, they got ripped off. Jack Kirby, he was better off than most, but still got ripped off quite a bit. And then you got guys like, all the comic strip guys were living large. The guy Hegre who did Tintin, he had some depression issues, but he was pretty much living large. Charles Schultz, he's one of the most successful ones. Winsor McKay, really successful. Charles Adams, I read that one, really successful. But it's like all the comic book guys were ripped off and died in obscurity. All the comic strip guys and all the magazine guys were like, ooh, living hot. We were really successful. Tetsuko here, the Japanese comics, I'm pretty sure he did really well. But it's like, if you were an American comic book artist, you probably got ripped off and died in obscurity. It's just kind of like, oh man. But Edward Gorey, I'm pretty sure he did real well. Robert Crumb, was he in here? I can't tell. Lynn Kendall Ward. I don't even know who that is. I don't think I know that name. Al Hirschfeld, he did well. So it's like the comic book guys were they just got the short end of the cartooning stick for almost everything for 100 years. It's just like, whoa. But been enjoying reading that one. The other thing I pulled off my shelf, but I haven't started yet, a Stelios Polyp by David Mazzucchelli. And I read this back in 2009 when it came out. And it's funny, because what I did was, I used to, I occasionally still write comic book reviews on my blog, radiantcomics.com, my webcomic and blog. But I actually looked, I did a search to see because I thought I wrote a review of this 11 years ago. So it was like I was reading my 11-year-old review to see what I thought of it back in 2009. It's like I do that sometimes with my old reviews because I don't remember any thoughts I had on this in 2009. So it was, it's almost like a journal for me is what the blog is. So I can go back and see what I thought. But I want to reread that again. Just because it's been a lot of years, I may as well give it another read. Let me show you something too that I just pulled this out on a whim to show you. In the 90s, I used to make mini comics. And I got the idea in my head. I didn't necessarily want to make a mini comic, but I wanted to make a book. So I took a bunch of the artwork that I had been doing. I did this. I finished this maybe a month or two ago. This is all artwork I had done over the winter. So I tell you, I went and I found just the right paper. I tested all my printing. I was doing all the. Actually, the idea I got. The reason I started doing this too is I have so much. My inkjet printer, I bought a few years. I used to run Epson printers, liked them. Very high-end kind of Epson printers, but the ink was really expensive. And after a decade or 15 years of running Epson printers with expensive ink, I decided I wanted a printer that had good knockoff inks. So that I got a Canon printer, good printer, but it also has a lot of good knockoff inks. And the difference is, let me tell you the difference in price. A set of Epson or Canon, the OEM, original manufacturer inks, for one set of inks, $70 to $80. That's for 6 or 7 cartridges. The knockoff inks, it's $20 for about 3 sets of inks. I mean, that's an order of magnitude cheaper. $20 for 3 sets as opposed to $80 for one set. So it's like, but I don't print that much black ink. And they put extra black ink in the sets I get. So I had so much black ink. I'm like, I want to do something printing out black ink because why not? Turns out what's annoying is even when you're printing in just black and white, it still uses some of your color inks. That's just the way inkjet printers work, and it's annoying. But I made about 5 copies of it for no reason. It's funny because I made the copies, was like, whoa, that was cool. I really enjoyed doing that. And then they all just go on a shelf. And I never even showed them off. So I figured I'd show them off here for a moment. And one last thing I want to show off is artwork. I have a small original art collection. I showed you a piece this last week. Let me show you. Let me take this out of its Mylar. This one's kind of falling apart. We got to be careful with it. This is a Jack Abel original. These must be the foothills. And if you look up there, the hills are drawn as feet. This was just a little doodle. Back when I worked at Marvel in the early 90s, Jack sat next to me. He was the proofreader there. And he just doodled this one day. I guess he was proofreading some Conan and wanted to make a little Conan drawing. And he made this little drawing and amused me, and he gave it to me. And as you can see, it's on some sort of little note paper that's just disintegrating because it's turning brown and brittle. But I have it, if you notice there, I have little photo corners. So I have it mounted on a full back backing board, magazine size. So that's what I do with a lot of my small original art too. I mount it with photo corners. They're just little plastic corners that the edges slip in, and they're archival too. And then I put it in a piece of Mylar, so it stays good. Because otherwise, you can't handle this piece of paper. As you see how brown it is, but I always loved that. These must be the foothills. Figured I'd show it off to you. Oh, and my big ink drawing, I may as well show you that because I've been doing a lot of those. This is another of my big ink drawings. I'm working on another one behind it. This is Boudica's daughter. Now I'm coming up with stories for all my big ink drawings. Lots of boxes. Boudica was the rebel who in England, or whatever it was called way back then, who fought the Romans. And she had 2 daughters, and they all died fighting the Romans. And when she went into the this is Boudica's daughter, who in the afterlife looks over doomed rebels. So there's the eyes looking over. So it's a double. If you see Boudica's daughter, she's going to try to help you, but your rebellion might be doomed. So it's a double-edged sword when you see Boudica's daughter. Because who doesn't want someone from the afterlife trying to help them? But you're probably in a doomed rebellion. But anyway, there's some art, there's some comics, and you guys have a good week out there.